So I'm sure some people are going to think this is really stupid, but I don't care, because I wish I had seen this kind of stuff myself before I went and did all this. Just ran this thing in some really dusty conditions. You can kind of see on the intakes here how it's just all packed, and like it'll actually draw dust and shit through the receptacles, so you got to blow all those out and everything. You know, good idea to take all the covers off of it, and or all the, you know, sheet metal off of it, and blow everything out if you run in some nasty conditions. But so I got the air housing on top of it, and I finally found a pre-cleaner that works. It's a Turbo 3 2-inch pre-cleaner, which, stupid name I know, but it's a centrifugal pre-cleaner. It's got the little like turbine wheel or whatever the shit you want to call it on the inside. The air housing is a 2.5 inch. The pre-cleaner is a 2-inch, so I actually just stuck the pre-cleaner inside of the air housing, because that air housing I purposely oversized for the engine and the CFM airflow of the engine, because I want as little restriction as I can possibly manage, while still having a functioning pre-cleaner. One of my other videos I had showed the Donaldson topspin pre-cleaner that I had on there, and it was just simply too large for the engine. The little turbine or whatever the shit you want to call it on the inside wouldn't spin. And then I tried another pre-cleaner and it pulled too much restriction, yada yada yada. I need to make a separate video on that altogether. But one thing that I like didn't know about these housings is they're actually designed to like eject debris out of them. And so on the inside of the housing, like, pre-cleaner aside, on the inside of the air filter housing, it's molded in there where it'll swirl the air around the air filter. And it'll actually swirl shit. I guess it goes that way, actually. But it'll swirl shit into this little valve right here. And this is like a little split where it'll open up. And especially on a gasoline engine, if the engine revs up quickly and like the throttle plate, you know, slams open, there will be a pressure change in the intake, and these housings will actually like fart out the dust. And it's really cool. So it'll do that anytime, you know, it goes from like idle to slamming the intake wide open, because of course you go from, on a gasoline engine, a very deep vacuum in the engine with the throttle plate all the way shut, and then when it slams open, there'll be a huge inrush of air, and then it seems like it kind of backflows a little bit, which actually works out great for kind of like back purging these air housings, if you will. Was just running this thing for generator power in some pretty heavy dust, and so it was at, you know, high RPM under a constant load for a while, so it hasn't like farted out the dust yet. But we'll start it up here and we'll see if it does that. Of course it's nighttime and I got some light shining on it, so you should be able to see pretty well, because it's really apparent when you're standing there in person, not so much over the camera. So I mean, like, I think that's really cool that they kind of self-clean to a certain level. It's not like you never have to change the air filter or whatever, but they will, you know, fart out any extra dust or whatever. And the housing will actually do it with water too, because ideally you want this little valve on the very bottom, and like there's a little arrow and everything that says up. Well, got a smaller version here so you can see it says up, so the valve's on the bottom, because the housing on the welder sits completely flat on top of it. I can't have the valve be straight down, so it actually sits off to the side a little bit like that, because you can see on the housing that, you know, the valve sits a little bit below the level of it, so I had to rotate it kind of to the side like that so it would clear. But it still works. It'll eject water and everything out of it. Yeah, you know, just like I said, I wish I had seen something like this for myself, and can't really find much of anybody talking about it, and like, you know, what size air housing is, you know, good for this engine and all that kind of stuff. Maybe there's some information out there. I know Donaldson has, and Fleetguard and Baldwin, everybody else has, you know, charts of, you know, okay, this engine requires this much airflow, so on and so forth. But it seems like typically those charts and everything are like sized small, so that if you put on the air housing that they tell you to for a certain engine, it actually pulls, like, you know, a fair bit of restriction, like maybe 6 or 8 inches of restriction, inches of water of restriction, you know, with a perfectly clean air filter, which I didn't want. So like I said, that's a relatively large air filter housing for this engine, and that precleaner is again relatively large for this engine, but I wanted as little restriction as possible. But yeah,